Namaste, Jai Hind and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I am Anand Narsimhan. It was on the September 18th, ladies and gentlemen. Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, made startling allegations and accused Indian agents of being involved in the murder of Khalistani terrorists and a wanted man in India, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It's been 9 days since the Canadian Prime Minister made this startling allegation, but there has been no evidence that's been presented yet. Except for terms like credible reasons and credible allegations, there is no credible evidence that's been presented. Now, speaking at the UNGA, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar sending out a stern message to nations like Canada, saying that political convenience should not determine responses to terrorism, extremism and violence. Here's the gist of what he said. He said politics must not dictate response to terror. He also went on to add that we can't cherry-pick respect for territorial integrity. Non-interference in internal matters must be respected. A rules-based global order must apply to all. And without genuine solidarity, there can't be real trust. He also went on to say that some continue to support Sikh Khalistan elements and extremist ideologies. Now, this is what a 2018 public report actually came out and said, ladies and gentlemen. A 2018 public report issued by the Department of Public Safety under Mr. Trudeau, who's currently the Canadian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. This is what the report, and this is how it was worded. Some individuals support Sikh Khalistan movement. 1985 Air India bombing is the deadliest plot launched in Canada. In Canada, two key Sikh organizations remain listed terror entities. Babbar Khalsa International Sikh Youth Federation associated with terror. And this is the public report on the terror threat. There was a huge uproar. It was prepared by the Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. The department was headed by Mr. Ralph Goodale in 2018, who's currently serving as the High Commissioner for Canada in the United Kingdom. The report was based on the review of intelligence and information from the CSIS. The 2018 report faced opposition over the usage of the term Sikh extremism. Then it was watered down. The Trudeau government gave in to the pressure and published a revised report where the wordings were watered down. In 2019, the revised report did not say Sikh extremism or Khalistan, but it talked about extremist individuals and entities. The then Punjab Chief Minister, Captain Amrinder Singh, actually slammed the revised report and called it politically motivated. The question that we are also asking here is, did Justin Trudeau know all along? Because in 2017, India had repeatedly raised the issue of Hardeep Nijjar along with the others, but the Trudeau administration looked the other way. So can Justin Trudeau turn around and try and play holier than thou when he himself has disrespected the rules-based order or the rules-based respect for law or territorial sovereignty? Let's go across to our guest this evening and ask this question, because the dimension expand even into the Five Eyes. We'll come to that in just a bit. Charlotte Littlewood, research fellow, Henry Jackson Society, is with us. She had thrown light upon some very, very startling findings in the United Kingdom, which made the UK wake up to the fact that this Khalistani threat or this extremist groups could also hurt society and the United Kingdom itself. Terry Milewski, author of The Blood for Blood, 50 Years of Global Khalistan Project, is with us. Ray Locker, author and journalist, with us, and Ambassador Deepak Vohra also with us. Namaste and thank you very much to the lady and the gentleman on the panel. But Charlotte Littlewood, this Khalistan issue is something which has been prevalent in the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. The UK woke up to these realities which existed from the 80s onwards, but sometime mid of 2010, 2020, around 2015, there seemed to be a realization that this is coming back to bite the UK itself. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're seeing an issue in the UK of Sikh radicalisation into Khalistani extremism. I'm in the middle of interviewing those who consider themselves to be radicalised and now de-radicalised. who talk about being drawn into criminal gangs, even really worrying statements about having involved themselves in stockpiling of weapons, and that's something that was noticed across others in the movement too, even the buying of shotguns. So it's really concerning that it's not being seen in this frame by Canada, and I am concerned it's not being seen in the same frame in the UK. Last year we saw the attack on the Indian High Commission in London, and then we saw the threats against the Sikh family who stood up against Khalistani extremism, who felt like the police really hadn't come to their aid, and government counter-terrorism officials had completely dismissed their needs. So I think there's a lot of questions now to be levelled at the UK and how it handles this threat, and to really get behind the Sikh community who are really at risk here, A, from radicalisation, and B, from being attacked by pro-Khalistani separatists who stand so violently against Sikhs who do not agree with them.
Yeah, there is brazen intimidation, and I'm personally witness to this intimidation when I was in Australia recently, but that's another matter. But Terry Milewski, in Canada, are politicians across the aisle responsible for trying to broad brush or perhaps, cover up for these extremist entities? How is it that people with red corner notices, criminal records, wanted across the world and also highlighted by the Interpol, get Canadian citizenship and entry into Canadian soil? Sukhtul Kunek is also somebody who is wanted by the Canadian authorities, and he was found dead in Winnipeg.
There are indeed some problems that Canada has to answer that have been going on for decades now, and I'm talking more than 40 years, where politicians, for electoral reasons, for vote bank reasons, have looked the other way, and they've comforted themselves with the notion that, well, they're not committing terrorism against us. They may be plotting and scheming and sending money to generate attacks in Punjab, but that's an Indian problem. That's not our problem. That's how the argument works. That's how this gets perpetuated. But there is also a failure to recognize that this is not just about bombs going off, front-page terrorist attacks. It's about the insidious infiltration into the community of the extremists that your previous guest was just addressing in the UK. It's about the attempt to, for example, teach children that the bombers back in the day, the Air India bombers of the 1980s, that they were heroes, not terrorists. It's about teaching young people that if they see this parade of martyrs, the parade reenacting the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in October of 1984, that's to remind children, that throw a little extra red paint on Mrs. Gandhi's sari in the display, to tell children that, yes, this was a bloody affair and we're proud of it. We'd do it again if we had the chance. This is something that you should grow up and emulate. We're talking about pro-terror propaganda. We're talking about the display of martyr pictures of the Air India bombers, for example. All of this kind of insidious, doesn't count as front-page news in Canada. It's normalized in Canada. It doesn't count as terrorist acts. So the Canadians can comfort themselves and say, well, India hasn't shown us that these people are doing anything. They're not doing terrorism. They haven't done anything lately. So why should we return them to India? Besides that,
for the Canadian establishment, if this is not an act of terrorism, so is 9/11 also treated the same way? So can they reenact the crashing into the Twin Towers and reenact 9/11?
I do not think they would get away with it. I think you're absolutely right. We apply double standards throughout this affair. It doesn't matter when it's not happening to us. And of course, they felt that many Canadians, felt that 9/11 did happen to us. But even though the vast majority of the victims of the Air India bombing, for example, were Canadian citizens, well, they were Indian Canadians. They were of Indian heritage. They weren't really us. It pains me to say it, but look at the official reports of the Air India inquiry, and you will see that, yeah, that's a painful truth. We didn't feel that those victims were really Canadians.
But you offered them Canadian citizenship. They've made Canada their home. So if you don't really feel that they are Canadians and their lives are dispensable, then don't give them citizenship. Ray Locker?
Yes, I was addressing the Air India victims rather than the people identified by the Indian government as terrorists today. But I mean, look at what's happening. We recently had a scene at the voting for the so-called referendum on Sikh independence.
Yes.
Here in Surrey, in British Columbia, we had I've just been looking at the videotape of Mr. Panoon, Gurpatwant Singh Panoon, the leader of Sikhs for Justice that is organizing the referendum, standing at the side of Ajab Singh Bagri, one of the principal Air India suspects and the first deputy to Talvinder Parmar, standing next to Parmar's mother as they vote and applaud and say Khalistan Zindabad and hail the great martyr Talvinder Parmar, the worst mass murderer in Canadian history. So it's very bizarre. And it's time for Canadians. Let's hope that this affair, this confrontation between Trudeau and Modi, wakes Canadians up to what's been going on. Okay, so they're not setting off bombs, but they are burrowing into our society, and there's the rot from within that they are fermenting.
But Ray Locker, Gurpatwant Panoon is an American citizen. He's on Canadian soil, talking about the balkanization of yet another nation, which is perhaps one of the largest democracies in the world. That's okay by US law?
Look, if he's speaking in Canada, the fact that he's a US citizen really is kind of irrelevant in that respect. Does it make it right? Absolutely not. Anybody who's talking about killing innocent people, should be subject to the laws of whatever country in which they're doing it. I mean, he's obviously on a watch list. People are paying attention to what he's doing, but there's really little the U.S. government can do about a U.S. citizen doing something overseas, particularly if it involves speech. Now, if it involves moving money around to known terrorist entities, that's a different story. It's distasteful, obviously, and I can understand why people in India don't like it. But right now, there seems to be little that U.S. government can do about it other than monitor his behavior.
But Ray Locker, if in Delhi tomorrow, there was a movement that was started for the separation of Texas from the United States of America, or to restart the secession of Quebec, and to give an open platform under the garb of freedom of speech and expression right outside the Canadian embassy and the U.S. consulate here, would that be okay? Will it be seen in the same prison?
Unfortunately, in this country, it would be okay. Look, we have people in the U.S. Congress who are talking about states should secede and maybe we should have a civil war. And it's detestable, but it's allowed. And so, yeah, people can go ahead and do that. We know who they are, we watch who they are, but under our system, that's allowable. It crosses the line when somebody says we should secede or we should permit someone to secede and then commits a violent act or gives money to somebody who commits a violent act. And that becomes a criminal conspiracy. But to just say it, there's nothing that we can do about that.
But
that's
dossiers have been
provided.
Dossiers have been provided about Gurpatwant Panoon and his activities. What has the US done? The allegation is, and the fact is that most of this Khalistani activity and this activity of calling for secession against Bharat, sending people into India to try and foment these kind of activities on Indian soil, is all happening in the Five Eyes nations. Ambassador Deepak Vora, thank you for your patience. So is there more to it than meets the eye? How are these entities getting safe passages only into these Five Eyes nations, where gurudwaras are taken over by these extremist elements and this kind of propaganda is openly allowed? Do you really believe that we'll be allowed to do this, or America, Canada, the UK, Australia will tolerate it if all these activities of secession against these nations are allowed to fully operate on Indian soil?
Thank you very much, sir. Always a pleasure to be with our mega anchor on a mega channel. I'm talking about you and CNN. And of course, I learned from the other colleagues who have been there. You've said something very interesting. With all these other countries tolerate it if we allowed funny things to happen. Do you remember what the great Mahatma Gandhi once asked about Western civilization had responded? He said, I think it would be a great idea. These ruffians have no idea. So let me just tell you something which is very, very interesting. Why is this just-out fellow so upset over the death of his favorite Khalistani plumber? And if he's so fond of plumbers from the Punjab, we can send him several hundred and they'll take care of his personal and professional leaks. I recommend to all the people, the millions of people who are watching your show, sir, right now, as we speak, I'm in the World Buddhist Center in the nation's capital, and we did a little prayer in the home of the Buddha to give some buddhi to these Buddhus. But I would recommend this book called Cold Terror, 2004, by a friend, I knew him, Stuart Bell. And he had said that Canada has been messing around with these radical terrorist groups. It wasn't just the Sikhs, it wasn't just Babbar Khalsa, but also those nasty fellows from the LTTE, the Tamil fellows. You know that the Sri Lankan representative in New York has blasted Canada for sheltering these characters and then saying, oh, you guys are committing human rights violations. And then there was also the Hezbollah fellow, so the Israelis don't like them. Now, in this book, he says, we have become terror-centered. I'm talking of 2004, and he predicted that funny things would happen. I believe that that should be read. Every Canadian should get mad. As my colleague just said, well, the feeling is it's not happening to us, it's happening to those third world types, so let it go. Sir, when I was at university, we learnt about Robert Merton's law of unintended consequences. You might do an action expecting certain results. The consequences can be totally different. Now, what has happened, sir, because of this plumber fellow and what this just out character has said, Canada is divided like never before. Bharat is united like never before. We've all rallied around the government and said this character has lost it. He's talking arrant nonsense. He talked of credible allegations. Come on, sir, give us some incredible evidence. I mean, who are you? Who do you think you are that you can get away with this kind of arrant nonsense? In India, I've been in diplomacy 50 years and counting. If I had to say something, expel a country's diplomat, I've done it. I would probably call the High Commissioner Ambassador of that country and say, look, buddy, your chap is up to no good, just tell him to leave. We don't make a song and dance about it. And then he says we have credible allegations but no evidence. How do you make an allegation to your parliament? How do you humiliate your own parliament without any evidence? And then, if you think that your intelligence services are so good, how come you are honoring a 98-year-old fellow? You called him a war hero, a Ukrainian war hero, a Canadian war hero. He turns out to be a Nazi. So do you remember what a character whom you may like or may not like, or Vladimir Putin had said about this stand-up comic in Kiev? He said this guy is a neo-Nazi. And now Canada is honoring Nazis. I just don't understand what's happening to these guys. In search of political advantage, you are prepared to barter away the reputation of your country. I'm privileged to be special advisor to 3 governments in Africa. After listening to what Dr. S. Jaishankar said, 2 of the ministers from these countries, in almost identical language, Swahili, have said, you did well to give it back to this Ujinga Muzungu, which basically means crazy wanderer, referring to the white people who came to Africa. They wander around aimlessly and they are crazy. He said, you did well. And another unintended repercussion, the solidarity of the developing world, the global south, is intensifying thanks to this man's action. I think he's become an embarrassment even for his allies, forcing them to choose.
See, a lot of what you're saying is quite tongue-in-cheek, Ambassador Deepak Vora, so it has to be taken in that fashion because you say a lot of things seriously, but I also quote it with a lot of satire and sarcasm. We've just got an update coming through, and this is via Group Editor Security Manoj Gupta. The question is, was Hardeep Nijjar killed by the ISI? Intel sources revealing to News 18 that the ISI wanted to finish Nijjar off and blame Bharat. Intel sources reveal that Rahat Rao and Tariq Kiani are allegedly 2 ISI plants in Canada who are doing most of the ISI's legwork on ground. Sources revealing to CNN News 18 that Nijjar was becoming powerful with time and gaining popularity in local Canadian community say the trio of Rahat Rao, Kiani and Panun are possibly who have given this task to control the drug and immigration business, which is the main source of income for them. Nijjar's proximity and affection to Pak-based group leaders like Vadhava Singh, Nitta was also a problem for the ISI because these people in Pakistan were unable to do major tasks asked by them. This factionalism aspect is not coming forth for the first time. Charlotte Littlewood, this factionalism, is there merit basis to it that there are different gangs, different groups, and one could bump off the other?
I mean, absolutely. The evidence that we have so far, we don't have the evidence that Trudeau wants to supply to us, nor do I have the evidence around the ISI role. But the evidence we do have is that this is an inter-gang violence situation. And we had a similar killing just days, if not within a week, of Trudeau's statement made on Monday, which was intra-gang. So yes, there are different gangs with different interests, heavily linked to drug trafficking and people trafficking. So
8:30.
I think there could be a situation in which the gang violence is being taken advantage of by certain states for their political end, but we are yet to have open source evidence of that.
Terry, you would be able to throw light on this. Are these interlinked? This entire drug running business, immigration business, and these Khalistani elements, and are there gangs within them?
This is a very important area of the whole story, which is completely it's underestimated to an amazing degree, that people have not recognized yet that there is this tight intermingling of the world of organized crime and the world of the Khalistani militants. They are in opposition to the system. They see themselves as outsiders. They want to keep their children away from Western secular influences and law. They think that they're a different class somehow. And I mean, look, for example, at the death a year ago. There was another militant, as you know, who was murdered. Hardeep Singh Nijjar was only, by the way, the financier of the Baba Khalsa terrorist group, which blew up Air India. That's why he was on trial for that 1985 bombing. Well, he survived long enough until last year when he was assassinated in similar style. A couple of guys, masked men, run away in a getaway car. Later you find the burning car. Well, he was steeped in organized crime all of his life. Immigration fraud, welfare fraud, you name it. And people didn't really take that on board. In Canada, they didn't really quite realize that this sort of criminality and the sort of political extremism seem to be two sides of the same coin. And in the same way as in what's happening now is they don't really appreciate, for example, how while their government is decrying India for allegedly killing Mr. Nijjar, they are now seeing in Canada for the very first time videotape of what Mr. Nijjar was really up to. Another tape I was reviewing just yesterday was one of Mr. Nijjar giving a speech at his Gurdwara, of which he was the president, the one at which he was assassinated, in which he's praising to the skies the great record we have of killing people. Look at the assassination of Indira Gandhi, he says. What about the assassination of General Vaidya, who led the army troops, as you know, at the Golden Temple? What about the assassination of Chief Minister Bayant Singh of Punjab in 1995, I guess? He lists all of these wonderful events, he says. Look at what we've done. These are our achievements. And then he raises his fist and he says, this is our legacy. They are explicitly endorsing murder as a method of doing politics. And people have not noticed this at all. And I think I'm hoping that now people will wake up and realize that they're not just sort of preachers. You know, these are not holy men. We're dealing with criminals, and we better realize that.
I'm just going to check if we have a list of what we have submitted to the Canadian authorities with respect to Hardeep Nijjar. Since 2015-2016, Ray Locker, he's had an Interpol Red Corner notice against him. Dossiers have been submitted to the Canadian authorities about Nijjar and Nijjar's activities. Holding an AK-47 on Canadian soil is against Canadian law. He is actually, we've got videos of him put out on 27th of February 2015 on this very platform, with him wielding a gun in British Columbia, in the hills. Why do you think the Canadian authorities would not act against such a man?
Well, I don't know the actual reasons, but I can tell you my experience of covering similar activities involving Islamic jihadist terrorists here is there's fear, There's a fear of being accused of being a racist. You don't want to rile up an ethnic community in your country that you don't really understand. I mean, I know that when I was involved in reporting on that community when I was in Florida, we were constantly accused of being Zionists and racist, and that makes people stop doing things. And as Terry mentioned, there's a lot of people who are like, it's not really happening to us. It's really, in some places like the United States, it's only a problem if it happens to a white person, and that's what really gets a lot of attention. I don't know why they're not doing what they should do. It seems like the evidence is clear. When you have these videos of guys running around, shooting off automatic weapons, saying all the things they're doing, there's obvious evidence that something is going on. I think probably in the Trudeau government, they have a lot of support from the Sikh community and they don't want to anger them. And so that makes politicians not do the things that they should do when it's obvious there's a problem.
Why have we as a nation, Ambassador Deepak Vora, not been so vocal about this? There's a series of instances that happened in Canada and also across the Five Eyes nations. We'll put out those details while you speak. Why have we soft pedaled? Why have we not been vociferous about this for such a long time?
Our system is different. We do not believe in a confrontational approach. I've been 50 years in diplomacy. We try and deal with it bilaterally and quietly, but we convey our message with firmness and conviction. This goes back to Chanakya of Samdam Bhed Dand. We try persuasion, we try all kinds of things. We focus on bilateral issues, on the positives, and then hope that the fellow will get the message that it is not acceptable. But when he crosses all limits, then we have to do what we have to, which we have done. And so one of the unintended consequences of what you are seeing happening now with the tough stance that we have taken, the Khalistani fellows in Canada are going to ask this whatever his name is, are going to ask him that, listen buddy, we were acting on at your behest, now why don't you protect us? Our properties are being seized in India, our OCI cards are being invalidated, so you've got to do something, and if you don't, we'll clobber you. I just hope they don't try and clobber him, because then that Canada will go up in flames. I mean, it's a vertical split down the middle in Canada because of this incident, as it is a total unity in India over this incident. So I just hope that I'm wrong and that these guys do whatever they have to, but don't turn on their host. They don't bite the hand that feeds them, although in international relations, sir, we've seen this ever so often.
But if I have a criminal record, will I get citizenship of Canada, Ambassador Deepak Vora? How have Sukhdul Dunek, Arsh
Yes, of
Dalla,
course you will.
Goldie Barar, and how have they got citizenship? How have they entered Canadian soil? Is the problem here on our side, or something wrong there at the Canadian immigration?
I think there's a feeling somewhere in Canada that you need these guys to keep pressure on other countries. They did this with the Tamil Tigers, they've done it with Hezbollah and so on. You get all these desperados and you use them to pressure the governments of the countries from which they come, so that those guys, whatever your interests are, they would be more amenable to those interests. This is a very old game, and it's a game that can no longer be played, as our foreign minister made very clear in Parliament today. The difficulties, sir, that I see with a country like Canada, large country, small mindset, it's not there at the global high table. If you want to be there, if you want to be a superpower, you need military power, you need money, you need acceptability. Canada has none. And yet it continues to fantasize that the world without Canada would be a terrible place, whereas some other people feel we'd be much better off if Canada changed its priorities.
Terry wanted to say something.
Can
Yes,
I
Terry.
add one thing?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on your question, directly on your question of, how come these people get Canadian citizenship? Remember that there's a strong undercurrent within the Canadian immigration system that the poor Sikhs are being persecuted in India, and that they come with asylum claims saying, I've been driven out of my own country by the persecution by the fascist and genocidal Indian government, and that this has been listened to. This is the propaganda that has been going on for years and years and years. In some cases, there are indeed genuine grievance stories, people who have been tortured in Indian jails. Some of those have influenced, though, Canadian politicians and the bureaucracy to accept these kinds of excuses. I mean, we recently saw, for example, Simranjit Singh Mann, who runs a separatist sort of splinter group in a political party in Punjab, saying that he quite openly, he finances his party by selling letters given to people who want to run away to Canada, in which the letters say, I'm a persecuted member of Simranjit Singh Mann's separatist party. Please let me in. I need political asylum. I'm a persecuted refugee. And Canada has listened to that. In the case of Nijjar, for example, which I think is highly relevant right now, he came and said, well, look, I've got a Canadian wife. And the immigration officer said, no, you don't. You just married her last week as a marriage of convenience in order to get into Canada. So turned him down. He went away, got a different convenient Canadian citizen wife, and he was allowed in and given citizenship. That's how it works.
But it shouldn't work like that. Daniel Boardman, would you agree if that this was being used, this entire Khalistani agenda was being used as a soft tool against nations? Daniel Boardman joins us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this has been a problem, and Terry's been amazing on this in the country. The only one in our national media who's really covered this. You have a story, I mean, I frame this story in Canada. It's really a story about Pakistani foreign interference, framed as a story of Indian interference, when the real story is Chinese interference. So that's what we're dealing with. And Terry's had an excellent career sort of outlining all the data that the Khalistani movement has done. You know, the Air India bombing #1, all the assassinations we have on Indian officials in Canada, that can't stand, and then inviting those convicted assassins in Canadian court to India to take photos. Insanity. So there's been a tacit endorsement of violent extremism from Canada. Why? There could be a confluence of factors. One, incompetence, maybe. You know, two, I think there's been significant ideological infiltration of the progressive left over the years by many radical ideologies. You can go communists, Islamists, Khalistanis too. So playing this whole oppressor-oppressed thing, we're the victims, you know, that's been very good at infiltrating our institutions and building up. And according to, you know, Ramasenga, former Liberal MP himself, when he kind of got kicked out of the Liberal Party for saying high-ranking members, cabinet ministers into the Liberal Party have Khalistani sympathies. And let's not even go into what Jagmeet Singh has said and what rallies he's been to, who he stood beside. So we sort of come to the point where these Canadian issues of sort of enabling have been cancerous in our society. It's been bad, and it's caused violence and ethnic tension, and that's fomented significant problems inside. But now it's metastasized. It's gone from a malignant tumor to a metastatic one, where it's now hurting our relations outside because it bled into India, and then we who knows if it's the Americans or us, or I don't know who's in charge of our intelligence agencies or who's in charge of making decisions right now, but it's not going well. So this is decades and decades of tacit endorsement of extremism come to light, and now we're dealing with the consequences internationally. We were always able to ignore it when it's just domestically, when it's just, you know, Canadians getting harassed and killed and threatened, and if they're Hindu or whatever, we can kind of ignore it. But now it can't be ignored because it's bleeding into other countries, and the Americans are going to start to take notice of what's happening. And are they going to say, you know, free trade and free borders between America and Canada, is that going to last? So there are very serious problems in Canada, and now it's come to the forefront where we have a Khalistani who's killed at a Gurdwara by, the Washington Post says, you know, a group of people who look Sikh. So either this was another instance, which happens often, of a, you know, Sikh Khalistani being killed by a rival Khalistani gang, or it's the Indian government disguising a hit as a Khalistani gang because there's just so many Khalistani gang hits that it's obviously the most, you know, the best cover to use. Either way, when you look at it from a Canadian and you break it down for more than 5 minutes, we have a problem here. And the problem is probably the Khalistani gang violence and terrorism #1. Like, that's probably our we probably need to fix that before we can take the next step in diplomatic relations.
But is it really Khalistani gangs, or is it that they're being propped up because they've been asked to do it at the behest of somebody else? And that's why I'm driving this and asking this again and again. Ray Locker, would you have intent to believe that if these Five Eyes nations, if they knew all along over the last 4 decades, they have not decided, they have not weeded them out of their society, they've allowed them there? Could there be a greater reason?
I don't know if there's a greater reason or not, other than ignorance, people not really paying attention. Sometimes it takes a number of instances of, unlawful activity for them to do something about it. You would think that the 1985 Air India attack would have gotten their attention. I actually went to the camp where those Sikh terrorists trained for that bombing. So the information is out there. You can find it. I don't know why they haven't done more about it. Maybe they didn't believe the sources. Maybe they didn't believe the people who were making the claims. I don't really know. But, Sikhs killed Indira Gandhi. You would think that that would be a big enough reason to get people to pay attention to the communities in their country that were doing that kind of activity.
Where did we fail, Ambassador Deepak Vohra, before I get a final comment from Charlotte Littlewood? Where did we as a nation fail?
Where did we fail in what?
In getting to account these Khalistanis, to ensure that nations don't allow them to breed, to ensure that gurudwaras are not corrupted by their violent fundamentalist beliefs, which are all false, that these agents of balkanization of Bharat don't get a free run.
We were depending on the understanding and goodwill of the host countries to discourage such activities. But when we realized that they are not playing ball, then we have to do what we have to do. Sir, today External Affairs Minister, in addressing the UN, talked of double standards.
Yes.
I would go a step further. There are no standards when it comes to international relations today. The world as it was manufactured 78 years ago with the disunited nations is not the world today. Today the South is getting together, the developing world, and saying, enough is enough, guys, get lost, let us handle things our way. And this is again one of the consequences of this fellow going lovey-dovey with terrorists of all shades and hues.
Were there such compulsions in the United Kingdom, which the UK politicians, perhaps some of them, succumbed to, while others decided to stand up against? Charlotte?
I think we also have a situation in the UK of ignorance coupled with political infiltration of those who are ideologically compromised. But we also have a very strong narrative spin that comes especially from our Islamist groups in the UK. And I would not be surprised at all if we were to see now and a lot more in the next few days, a real push from Kashmiri activists and pro-Khalistani separatists pushing together a narrative of victimhood at this very time, talking about the threats against Sikhs and potentially pro-Kashmiri activists in the UK. This kind of narrative that will spin the attention to the victimhood of Sikhs and Kashmiris. And this really takes root and influences our politicians, who cannot decipher themselves, if they're in a position of lesser knowledge, cannot decipher themselves who is the greater victim and what is going on. And I think that perhaps those that are in positions of knowledge, like myself, like those in India, maybe we have been naive to the extent to which we need to improve people's basic knowledge, comprehension and understanding. And I think that that's what's really come to the fore here, is without a foundation of comprehension and understanding of some of these issues, we're very easily drawn into victimhood narratives and false misinformation spins. And that's what we really need to look out for in the next few days. And I'm really hoping that what's happened in Canada, the silver lining, can be a impulsion for people to study this and understand this, so that they don't fall foul to what we will see from Islamist Kashmiri activists and Khalistani activists in days to come.
Well, final quick word from Daniel. You joined us late on this show, so quickly asking you, 2% of the total vote share or vote population of Canada. Out of that 2%, 800,000 Sikh Canadians, only about 5,000 are part of this entire Khalistani extremism. Why is Justin Trudeau pandering to them? How is it that these people are able to control the narrative?
Well, it's not about the votes. Stephen Harper grew the vote in the Sikh community by just being a good politician, talking to them, treating them like human beings, nothing about Khalistan. It's not about votes. It's about money and ideology. That's what's driving this, is can the Khalistanis, through some means, funnel money into the parties? And the other thing is the ideological infiltration of the progressive left. Claire hit it right. The Islamists always work with the Khalistanis. Anything about these groups, just look at groups that openly declare themselves to be allied with the Muslim Brotherhood or Jamaat-e-Islami or any of those open ideologies. Some of the Kashmir, if they're always in the same room with the Khalistanis and other radicals, and it's a confluence of the alliance of bad ideas and their infiltration of the progressive left and the growing rot of the progressive left taking over the mainstream left, especially in Canada. This could probably explain it a lot better than votes.
Thank you very much. I have to wind up. I've run over time. But after the break, as we say thank you to our panelists, we are in conversation, a quick excerpt of a longish conversation that we had with Amritpal Brar, an activist and a radio host based in Canada. Stay with us.